how much scaffolding they had to put up. And I was like, do you think they built that back then? Look at the scaffolding just to repair it today. And the immensity of the scaffolding was anything that you could see with a 20 or 30 floor building. And we're like, no, they didn't build that. They repaired it. And that was the whole story. The running theme of everything is they just kept walking in and finding previous settlements that were abandoned. Like, here's a good one for you. Palmanova, the one Starfort city that I sent you a bunch of images about.
I'm trying to bring that up right now.
That was an abandoned city.
Welcome back to Raised by Giants, and welcome everyone in the chat, moderators and members out there. Thank you very much for tuning in, even though it's a little later of a show than we normally do, but it's worth it. Doing it later this evening because we have with us tonight the creator of Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube, discussing energetic changes on Earth as the sun repeats its 400-year cycle of low activity, affecting global crop production, the economy, and everyone on our planet, with a timeline of what you can expect from now to 2030 as society resets. A warm welcome back to the show, David DuByne. Thanks so much for coming on, brother. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's been a busy 3.5 weeks trying to dive into history through Croatia and then up into Italy and then back over here to Taiwan with a different set of eyes, specifically looking for the event and trying to tie in timelines, rewritten history, the historical records of why some places were abandoned. And with the archaeologists that I'd spoken to, it seems that you can definitively find these time periods, but they're not exactly sure from one destructive phase to another exactly which decade it occurred, but it's in the record everywhere now that you look, from the oil paintings to the lithographs to the stone carvings. It doesn't matter, the historical accounts, the nautical museum and the port records, and everywhere you look, it seems that it's detached, but the dots are enough out there that if you start to look for them, you can find certain groupings of these dots that point to different timelines. And that's what the whole last 3.5 weeks was about, from Croatia into Italy. Was trying to at least scrape together enough information about the event coming this year in October of 2024, about what would happen if the tides were 2 to 3 to possibly 5 times higher for just a week before and a week after, coming into October 23rd of 2024 this year. How would that disrupt our society? So that was my whole journey, and that's why Ryder and myself are sitting here today talking. Wanted to discuss a little bit of it and some of my findings.
Well, we're rapidly approaching that 2030 mark here in a few years. You're going to have to change that bio, Dave. You know what does happen when we hit 2030? I mean, your channel is Adapt 2030. What happens when it is 2030, if all of this is still around and things haven't gone completely and utterly into catastrophe? Because there's always a possibility, right, that everything turns out fine.
Gold has soared past $2,000 an ounce. Wars in Israel and the Ukraine, rate cuts on the table, are fueling gold's meteoric rise. Deutsche Bank, UBS, Bank of America, and JP Morgan are all forecasting sizable rate cuts in an election year. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and Larry Fink of BlackRock pointed out similarities to the 1970s. In 79, we had the Iranian hostage crisis, war in the Middle East, and major U.S. cities in disarray and stagflation. Meanwhile, our national debt is skyrocketing higher, above $34 trillion. There's a direct correlation to the national debt and the price of gold. Call the proud Americans, the Patriot Gold Group, today before it's too late. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel. You're going to get some great in-class service. Also, Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. No fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 546-7020. And also now for the 7th year in a row, Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated IRA gold dealer. 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
I don't know.
There
Maybe
is
I'm
a-
just wishful thinking or hopeful thinking there, but there's always that possibility.
There is, and I'm just going to quit the channel and say I totally had gotten it wrong, so I don't even believe my own reality anymore at that point, and I'll have to probably check myself into some sanatorium to try to revamp my mind into whatever I built for myself as awakened reality is definitely distorted. But if you do look out at it, it seems that the elitists are getting us to do exactly that, build the reality for them. And these last set of economic meetings here with the WEF, they're very clean on their playbook moving out. It's going to be a very rapid fashion in the way that your arm's going to be twisted or society's arms are going to be twisted. But you can already see the amount of pushback is causing them some duress already that not everybody's going to go quietly into the night. So is it built around us and our compliance and our building their reality for them? But now there seems to be like, a call, a wrench dropped into the jet engine there because it doesn't seem that their plans are going smoothly. So will they move to all out brute force? But generally through history, what you realize is all out brute force just never works because it's easy to do a soft, invisible prison. But once you go to the brute force mechanism, because you've run out of options, people quickly awake, and it seems that then there's 10 times more pushback than the soft illusionary route for control.
I mean, here's what I'm saying. Okay, so nothing is really built to last, not even our society, right? I mean, you buy something, it breaks very quickly, and you have to buy a new one. I mean, that's consumerism 101. If people want to know more about that, they should look into the light bulb conspiracy. There's a fantastic documentary made on that in 2010. But anyway, my point is the only things that seem to last are appliances and tools from decades ago, right? Those refrigerators from the 60s and 70s are going to outlast us all, Dave, right? So now let's say now you walk into an antique store today, all of that stuff still works. It's all very usable because it's mostly manual things like cranks and presses, and they're all built very well. Now, here's what I'm getting at. If you were to, let's fast forward 100 years into the future. Let's say that me and you, Dave, or anyone that's listening to this just hops in a time machine and travels 100 years into the future. What do you think would be in those antique stores? The same stuff that's in it to this very day, or the stuff that's being made today?
Depends what type of quality of things you purchase today. Because me personally, I do two routes at this juncture. I either buy a high quality Japanese made like hand saw for, things that I have the farm, or I go to estate sales and I get the antiques from estate sales, or you can spend the money, which costs quite a bit more to get something of durable quality today. But the world we live in today is not made for buying a lot of high quality things because it's so absurdly expensive compared to, if you go into Tractor Supply or some kind of, I don't know, there's probably those stores near you. Everything's made in China. The tools are made to get like one or two projects done just around the house, then it's going to break. Versus getting something that has a lifetime guarantee on like a Craftsman wrench set or some sort of, ratchet sets or something like this that's going to be incredibly durable, where you get lifetime warranties with it, but then you're going to pay 3 or 5 times more than just the junk coming out. So there's two options now. And what I think would be in the future would be the copper pipes that are still here from right now.
Yes.
One thing that's surprising is the amount of copper piping that I saw in Europe still. going in, we stayed in a fair few nice Airbnbs because being off season and shoulder season, you get everything at a third of the price right now. It's a little chillier. Everything's not green and vegetative and pretty with all the flowers and the balconies and everything, but it's still pretty rad because you're in old Europe and incredibly old Croatia. But I noticed the copper piping was everywhere. And again, the benefits of copper piping throughout time immemorial. Those durables will still be around. The things that we might make today in terms of durability, like that Craftsman set that's going to cost you 5 times more, or some kind of tough tools, those will still be here. But as a general rule, I can't say maybe 5% of the stuff that's currently made today versus 95% of the stuff that was made 50 years ago. I'm looking around it. So I'm sitting in a kitchen / office here, and I'm looking at the durability of things going, none of the light bulbs will work because they're all meant to burn out after a certain time. And this whole thing, and I'm going to say another thing kind of on that goes with this. Everything in Europe has switched to LED lighting 100%. But the thing was, when I would get ready to line up photos, that I had that blink, 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 blink every time we were taking photos. So the forcing of us to go away from regular bulbs, not the curly Q CFL bulbs, but just what you would consider a regular incandescent bulb, very soft, very pleasing, very soothing when you have that light in your home, like a Tesla bulb that you see in coffee shops where you can see the lines coming out. You can turn it up or down, very much like the sun. When you turn up the electrical frequency or charge flow into the sun, it glows brighter, just like it does with these light bulbs I'm looking at here in a coffee shop, where you can then turn it down or up. That's a Birkeland current turning up the frequency and the electrical conductivity, electromagnetism of the sun, or you turn it down and it dims and is visibly noticeable. But that is one thing that really freaked me out, was the blinking of the LEDs that was really visible anytime I held up my phone camera. Not so much visible in my SLR camera when I was shooting further afield, when I have a telephoto lens, when I was like looking up at the steeple tops or, some kind of ether harvesting, domes and balls on top of cathedrals and things. Not visible then, but the phone picked up all the blinking LEDs. So those things are meant to break at a certain number of hours too. Like I can't even see our light bulbs. I go to estate sales, I'll get light bulbs from like the 1950s that still screw into the socket. It's crazy. Even in the 1950s, there were preppers everywhere. They'd buy like 1,000 light bulbs, and you go in and you can get 100 light bulbs in a box still that totally work, of just like soft white light from GE. And those are still around, but none of these LEDs will be around, nothing. But that really, the disruption in the sleep patterns too is what I noticed, because I only have a couple LEDs in my house, but over there in Europe, 100% is. So everywhere you go, every room you turn on, everywhere you try to, even the night lights that, you turn on before you're getting ready to go to bed, they're all blinking the whole time. And it's just really a disruptive light frequency zone around in Europe right now. So I was trying to go somewhere with the point with that of something not being left, but bricks probably will be left, maybe some stone, something like that, but nothing else. Maybe that's the reason that when we approached 2030, that whoever started manufacturing at that time and doing this understood that we were at the end of the age, and that it would be not worth the time, effort, money, capital input to allow people to keep anything, because it was all going to break anyway. So give them, less quality products.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that you bring up this copper piping as well, because copper is one of the most conductive elements that we have on the earth. And it's interesting that it's all PVC pipe now, and they made people switch to PVC pipe, and that makes you question, like, why did they do that? And PVC pipe is made out of plastics, all the plastics that are in our food, plastics that is in our water. It's disrupting our body. But I really think that and this is going to lead into your research that you're doing at the moment. I really don't think people understand how finite our society is, right? Literally everything can be gone in the matter of minutes. One flip of the switch, the internet goes down, we're screwed. We're literally screwed. Everything has been digitized. Documents, records, money, banks, books, grocery stores, post office, you know? And I understand why they did that. It's for efficiency and getting things done quicker. But the problem comes in when you've built your entire system on top of that, right? Nothing's going to last. If the internet goes down, this generation literally has nothing. And the people that think that they're making a difference on the internet, well, they aren't if they can just be erased, right? And in 100 years in the future, no one would even know that we existed. And that is a very high possibility. I mean, think about it. What has the last 23 years been about? It's been about the internet. It's how everyone communicates. It's how people get their voice out there through social media. You create content. That's what this show is. That's what your show is. And that's what a lot of people's lives revolve around is the internet. Take that away, we got nothing. And I guarantee in 100 years, if the internet was to go down, it just gets wiped. In 100 years, it'll be like we didn't even exist.
And you look at the quality of home building today too. These homes are not built for 100 years of durability. Homes that were built in the 1950s, yeah. But you look at today's just prefab construction, slap up a bunch of homes with like 2 feet between each other with the yards with their low maintenance, and you have your fee and somebody else mows your yard for you. Like those kind of buildings will fall down in 40 years. Because I'd seen the most interesting documentary about what would happen after a nuclear war, and not the nuclear war point, but what it was talking about after humanity quit inhabiting cities. Within 300 years, there would be nothing left except the most girthy of what you consider like superstructures holding up 8-lane highways and foundations of buildings. Even the aluminum would have corroded, the glass would have shattered. And after 1,000 years, there's absolutely zero trace of humanity. What would you be finding a quote unquote megaliths would just be like that, an 8-lane highway, concrete superstructure that was holding it up. We'd look at it and go, there's no carvings, there's no markings. We don't know when the era was, but we know it was big. Look at the substrate that they poured into this thing. And that's kind of where, the archaeologists would be at. They'd probably be trying to compare our concrete with Roman concrete. And be like, why was the Roman concrete so much more durable? We're looking at something from 3,000 years ago. You're 1,000 years in the future. So you're looking at something 3,000 years prior, which is much higher quality on the durability than this new substrate stuff. What happened? They de-evolved in society. So even concrete, our current concrete, is not even made to last. Think about the Roman concrete. I went around a couple of Colosseums, and here's a real interesting one for you. There's a city called Verona, Verona, and they have a full Colosseum in there. It used to seat 30,000 people. The thing is, it's smaller than the original one, which is another full floor taller, or another archway, much taller, and the base of it is at least double the width of the base of the stones. So what was told to me was they could not replicate the technology in the Roman era to build what they had found as their own cultural layer previously. So you got to realize the ancient Romans, when they went cruising around, they were finding different layers beneath them as well that they were re-inhabiting or refinding. But some of the stuff was so big, like part of a Colosseum. We always attribute the Romans, the Roman Colosseum. Well, that's small stuff in comparison. In Rome, they had to dig their Colosseum out. Like if you find a lot of the older photos, I encourage you to look at Rome and go into ancient Rome image gallery, say 1850, 1880 or something. And you'll find a whole bunch of images of Rome where they're actually digging the mud out from around the Colosseum. Like, it is nowhere remotely flat, what we see in today's images where there's little Vespas cruising around. It was mud 20 feet deep up through that thing. And then they were digging out a huge, huge amount of Rome, as we understand it, was covered in 20 feet of mud. And then we're up in Verona also. For them, the ancient Romans, quote unquote, that had the best technology, best concrete, best engineering, best aqueducts, best everything, they could not replicate the previous society before them of building on the girth and the size. They were just like, whoa, this is way out of our, this is, the complexity is too big, the stones are too big, it's way outside of our, our realms of being able, we'll just make it smaller, but same, but different. And, the old ones stand, there's one part of the wall on the old one that stands outside the new one. And it's just mind blowing to look at the size of the old one. Like, that's a previous reset society that built that first one. Romans replicated the second ones. And, one point to that is another thing that was noticeable, because once you go and you start cruising around the museums, you're going to come into a lot of statues that were damaged. And I was asking the curator there, I was like, I know they did a lot of purposeful damage to these statues. Like, what was it? Why did they go on? Christian era begins, Pisces begins. They moved out of Aries. They moved into Pisces with the birth of Christ, the fish. Before it was Aries, the ram, the lamb. And prior to that, it was Taurus, the bull. So there's a lot of bull iconography everywhere. But the one thing, moving from Aries into Pisces, I was like, why were the Christians so destructive on everything? And he's like, I don't know. It seems like they were trying to just break away the entire old world because it was a new world. So they were trying to destroy everything of the old world. And my light bulb came on. I'm like, that's exactly right. Because we just moved out of Pisces into Aquarius. And then look what's happening in just 5 years of the destruction of the old world. So it seems like when we enter into a new age, the old age is destroyed on purpose. Whether it be stone or whether it be digital or whether it be paper mache, I don't care. They destroy everything of the vestige of the old world to usher in the new world, the new energy, and all things from the old time, for a better term, are destroyed because they want you to know that you're in a new era. Because those statues all had the same damage to them. They ripped off the noses. And before, if you didn't know this, like any kind of large marble statues that would have been from Greece or Rome had crystals in the eyes, whether it would have been sapphires and some of the more, ornate kind of what you consider emperor type palace things, or to regular what you consider just like crystals of, white crystals. But each set of statues had eyes that literally glowed from crystals being inserted in the eyes. And they would rip off the noses, gouge out the eyes, rip off the head, cut off the hands, chip as much as they could off of the clothing that would be, it would look like a wavy clothing off that, and then just throw it off to the side. It took them several centuries to do that, but they definitely had removed or tried to destroy and remove vestiges of the old world as we moved into Pisces. And it wasn't like Christian era and the Christian, what you consider, you can attest better than me, around 300 AD or so is when Christianity really solidified itself. So between that zero mark era all the way until 300 AD, Christianity wasn't fully where you understand it is today with the church and all this thing. But for those 300 years, it was just a destruction fest. And when I look now, from Pisces into Aquarius, we just moved in there December of 2020. Oh man, there's been a lot of damage so far to our society in just 5 years, but it's all digital. So it's going to be way easier to destroy than a bunch of stone with crystal eyes.
Yes, I think that is the real conspiracy. They make things not durable. They make things not to last. They turn everything digital. And all of my work has been done on the internet, right? My channel, my podcast, my documentary, JFKX, on Amazon Prime, by the way. It's all on the internet, and it can be taken away very easily. If by some chance the internet gets wiped, there wouldn't be any physical evidence to prove any of the work that we've done, right? Now, people would say, oh, well, make sure everything is backed up onto a hard drive. and I do that, right? But here's the thing, Dave, that I don't think people are really thinking about. Who's to say that in the future, people will even be able to use a USB drive or a Type-C connector? We've seen how fast our technology has went. It used to be floppy disk to store your information on. And now no one has a floppy disk drive. Floppy disk drives are completely obsolete. So why do we believe that in the future, USB drives won't be obsolete? So that means even if someone finds your hard drive in the future, they aren't even going to be able to figure out a way to use it or get any of the information off of it, which I think is the case for a lot of these lost civilizations. My theory is that they were using a technology that we have absolutely no idea about or how to figure it out because it was so different than ours. So even if we were to find something, let's say from a couple of thousand or however long you think the last advanced civilization was, even if we have something that resembles what we have now, can we figure out how to use it? Which then really makes me think about, I don't want to really change the topic here at all. I want to keep on this topic, but it makes me think about like these UFOs, right? And the technology that we've supposedly reverse engineered from extraterrestrials, and these people talking about a crash retrieval, right? I think the crash retrieval narrative is a giant misnomer. I don't think that the crash retrieval means that anybody witnessed something falling out of the sky or they saw it on radar, so then they immediately went to it to retrieve it and get the technology to try and reverse engineer it. Crash retrieval, all right, I guess I'll give you an example. Let's say that me and you, Dave, I'm giving a lot of examples, but me and you, Dave, we went to Afghanistan, right? We decided to do an archaeological dig, right? We do the archaeological dig. We find some sort of craft. We find something that we have absolutely no idea about. That would be considered a crash retrieval. The crash retrieval doesn't depict an amount of time that it's been here. So I think when people are, talking about these crash retrieval stuff, it's not what it actually seems like that it is. I think that a lot of the stuff we have just dug up and we have found from ancient civilizations. And that's one of the interesting things that Bob Lazar talked about as well. I don't believe Bob Lazar's story, but it's a possibility that he was shown some things. And he said that he was under the impression that at least one of them were dug up, which then brings into a whole other line of thought. But back to people thinking that the technology that we have now is still going to be a valuable thing in the future. I don't think that it is. A USB drive that we have now is not going to be it's not going to be still the same thing in 200 to 300 years in the future.
I remember floppy disks. I remember my first floppy disk was 64K. 64K. That was big. You were able to put a couple documents on it, like before you'd have to walk around with two huge thick books like this thick, like, how much those would weigh, 5-8 pounds. Or you could carry it around this little floppy thing. Now, remember, we're only talking about what you consider today like Microsoft Word documents. And even then it wasn't MS Word. That took too much. It was more just like a notepad. So, yeah, those readers are gone. I mean, some people collect that kind of stuff, like Atari games and floppy disk readers. But I mean, there's probably only 1 in a million people who still have one of those that can access that technology. Because like your crash retrieval, for an example of finding advanced ether harvesting equipment that is still visible in what you can say like cathedrals and churches and spires and this sort of thing. For me, the equivalent of finding an old engine block in the middle of the forest somewhere. The wheels are gone. There's no frame on the car. It's just you found an engine block that's been stripped. There's no valves, nothing. You just found an engine block, and it was significant to do something to drive. There was another purpose for it, and you knew it was to create power to do something. And that's kind of where we sit with this whole ether harvesting, Tartaria technology. Because one thing I did see in the cathedrals that I noticed in not everywhere, a couple places, and then also was being actively stripped out of Croatia in a place called Šibenik, there's this copper, it's probably about 2 to 3 inches thick, running down the floors and then up each of the, so let's say it's an 8-sided dome cathedral that you're going into, like the copper, a good 2 to 3 inches wide. I don't know. I couldn't see the thickness of it, but it was running up and then up to the center and then up into wherever the spire was that was coming down. I've seen it at a couple places where it was still very visible in Italy, and they didn't take it out of the flooring or up on the sides of the walls going up to the top of the, the top of the dome and the cathedrals there. But in Šibenik, they were actually chipping it out of the wall. Like you could see where the whole chipping mark had gone up, where somebody had come in with like brute force to chip it and rip it out. But before they had a chance to, like smooth it back over. And this was in, where was it? This is in Split. But they had ripped it out of the wall, but they hadn't refaced the wall. So they left the gouge marks which were like, a good 6-8 inches wide, something like that, at that V where you could see they were getting down into it. So it makes me question, was it a square of copper that was running, or was it a V? Because the chip out marks all were V's going up all the different sides of this one cathedral that we went into. And then it was also being refaced from the outside, but the amount of like scaffolding and stuff was just mind blowing how much scaffolding they had to put up. And I was like, do you think they built that back then? Look at the scaffolding just to repair it today. And the immensity of the scaffolding was anything that you could see with a 20 or 30 floor building. And we're like, no, they didn't build that. They repaired it. And that was the whole story. The running theme of everything is they just kept walking in and finding previous settlements that were abandoned. Like, here's a good one for you. Palmanova, the one Star Fort city that I sent you a bunch of images about.
I'm trying to bring that up right now.
That was an abandoned city. The people in the Protectorate of Venice at the time was actually paying people to come up to live there. Now, here's the story. This Star Fort city is built it starts construction in 1598. They finished raising this city 50 foot into the air from a flat plain. It's 2.9 miles around, just on the edge of the walls, 30 feet tall. So I did some rough calculations because I brought a ruler with me. So I measured the bricks when I was out there. So they needed roughly 750 million bricks. And they were supposed to bring this in, bricks manufactured elsewhere, transported in there, and using, let's say, 1 billion bricks. We'll keep it at even billion. And they built that entire city in 30 years. But then on the outside of the brick layering, they had facing stones that were cut at a perfect 45-degree angle, and they needed about 75 million of those. So we're supposed to believe the historical record is they came in and it was a flat plain, like think about going into like Kansas, completely flat, and they said, you know what, that's not going to be good enough. That's not going to be good enough. Let's just raise 50 feet into the air and we'll fill it in with earth. But it's actually a substrate that I have some pictures of behind the walls that were broken apart in one single area. That people are leaving clues. They always have to leave you the truth. So if you look deep enough, you're going to find the truth somewhere in the site. So they raised this whole city up 50 feet, 2.9 miles around on the inner city. What you're looking at is the full construction of supposedly that furthest outer ring there was constructed by Napoleon in the 1800s. So it went through 3 different constructive eras. The first era went from like 1598 to 1630 or so. And that's interesting because that was the beginning of the Maunder minimum. and everything ceased for 120, 130 years. But within that first 30 years, they were able to move 1 billion bricks, build wall 2.9 miles around, 30 feet tall, put facing stones on it, and then upraise and lift the city full 50 feet and do that entire earthwork 50 feet deep. So we're talking about cubic miles of earth moving. And then I asked the curator, I said, well, where'd y'all get the bricks from? Because I'm looking at a lot of bricks out here on the wall. You know, I walked around, there's a huge amount of bricks, and it was so proud and happy. Oh, look what the construction we did. I said, well, by my estimation, because I measured some of the bricks, you needed almost 1 billion bricks. You needed 1.5 billion bricks. Just on the outer surface, you need 750 million bricks. Where did you get all the bricks from? Because I don't see any brick kilns. Oh, we brought them up from all these places. So she named like 3 or 4 places. And I was like, well, what's the average amount of bricks that you could put on a wagon at that time in the 1600s? Like, what's the weight on the, you couldn't put a ton on a wagon at that time. I mean, you would need multiple bulls or multiple horses in the energy in for the energy out. EROEI is going to be just blown off the charts trying to move a literal ton of something. And then I was like, well, how many broken wagon wheels are there laying around? Because I would expect to see tens of thousands of broken wagon wheels if you're going to be moving that much weight all over the place. Like, you should have like a Himalayan size, mountain of broken wagon wheels laying around, especially when you went to do the unloading and something tilted off to the side and broke both hubs or spokes. I mean, I should see like 100,000 broken spokes somewhere. There are millions of broken spokes if there's that much moving of brick going on. So just the sheer amount of volume. And then I did a calculation by using some rough online stuff here to get the calculation of 3,000 cubic meters of something that, what concrete, for a better term, to be able to put the bricks together. So we're talking about 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, 1 cubic meter. You needed 3,000 cubic meters just for the concrete mix in between that. I'm like, just dump trucks that we do today, that would take thousands of those dump trucks of what we do today. Like, who's mixing that? Where was the mixing facility? Where's your lime pits? Like, how did they mix all that? This place is so pristine. There's like really nothing left of the construction era. So the reason I'm telling you all this is, after all the construction was done, you think it would be like the most massive commerce ridden, just epicenter of business, because you need that much material, that much goods coming back and forth. You need that much, feed to be brought in for all the horses and bulls, and you need all the food for all the workers and the housing and this and that and that. And then by 1640, they can't get anybody to live there. So in Venice, they were asking and giving prisoners free homes that were pre-built up in this city to go live up there, because they couldn't get anybody to live there. Now, the stories are just so like fanciful. And then some people I talked to that actually live in the city were like, no, the Romans found this and they just kind of walked into it. It was already built.
Well, that's the theory with a lot of these structures, is no one really knows where they came from, how they were there. When you ask the historians, they'll be like, well, previous people just came in and it was already here. This other photo that you sent me, I think, is really interesting, because this looks like it was like they're trying to build like a fortress. Like, and I don't think that these things around it are like mountains. I think that they're actual structures that somebody built. And if you hit the share thing, it'll pop up on my end. And
I'll just go through your slides. I can explain this one easily. Now, this is in the Nautical Museum. And, you read the reviews online about going into the Venice Nautical Museum. They're like, oh, this is a dusty old thing. They haven't curated this thing. And damn, the thing's from like the 1980s. They haven't updated anything. And I'm like, that's where I'm going, because they didn't hide anything yet. So there's this series of probably 20 of these. And what it is, it's what the Italian Navy and the Italian military controlled as bastions along the coast. And it's a 3D. It's actually 3D. It's on the wall. It pops out. They did a 3D modeling of it. So from 1692, this is Isola Siate Fortezza di Corfu. and they'll show you anno, I mean, in the year of 1692. So they go through all the physical ports that they owned and controlled during that time, and they're all star forts, every single one of them. And you look at the size of this thing, that's like 2 kilometers long, or a little over a mile, 0.2 across that peninsula there. So you can go and find these same areas today. And I encourage you to do the matchups, because mainly they stripped away a lot of the star fort and they turned them into these new quote unquote shipping container ports. Now they use the base of it, of course, because it's already built. What they do strip out is the actual formations of it, but that was a terraformed land there. And then offshore also that island that's been terraformed a little bit. But I have a dozen of these images here, but I thought this was a real good one to show you that even back in the late 1600s, you're looking at how long would this take to construct first? And it looks like it's been there for quite some time, because the city is built and nestled within that. So, the time era of this fortification being built is not, in my opinion, the same time era that the city that exists within there was built. The fortifications were first. Those who came after found it, and it was abandoned. And then they started to build in what we consider that, haphazard, non-grid laid out, just city, because they found what they found. Okay, hey man, this place is a little better repaired than the rest. Why don't we start living here first? And we'll kind of work through it as we move through the decades here. Because that seemed to be the running theme, is this previous builder society one step back. And I would say that collapse of this builder society was 3,500 years ago. Because another thing that, talking to an archaeologist over in Verona, really very well spoken, just incredibly knowledgeable curator there. I forget her name, but she was so nice to stick with me through the museum, because we got there first thing. It was like 9 a.m. and nobody was there. The first person didn't pop in till 10. So we were the only two, me and my wife, in the museum walking around there. So the curator is with us. She took us to the Neanderthal area, and then I was asking about Denisovans, and she's like, we don't have any Denisovan sites here. But then they had this huge timeline on the wall, and it was very clearly marked where the electromagnetic excursions had happened, because they had 36,000 years, and then it came down, then they had 24,000 years, then they had 12,000 years. And then suddenly, the Younger Dryas impact. And once I said, hey, you have the Younger Dryas demarcated here at 12,500 years, that right away she knew that I knew something. So I asked her, you don't have it from 12,500 years to 8,500 years, you have 0. And she's like, yeah, we don't have anything. It's called the barren period. And I was like, oh, okay. So the barren period, like nothing, 0, not even a single artifact from 12,500 up until 8,500. And some of the most lush, verdant crop areas of what you consider northern Italy now. Wine, fields, wheat, whatever, nothing, 0. And suddenly around 8,500 years ago, she said that they became, suddenly independent tribes just popped out of nowhere. And, they only had they only had oral languages, which they passed down through, their traditions. And then suddenly, she says, around 7,000 years ago, the Sumerians come up and pop in and start to give them written language, and then start to help them with agriculture. So for 1,500 years, they lived as independent tribes, for a better term, or independent peoples up in northern Italy up there. And then suddenly, I don't know what they were doing. They don't know what they were doing either. Just a hunter-gatherers or whatever. And then the Sumerians pop in and give them all this tech, all this agricultural knowledge. And within like less than 1,000 years, they went from full nomadic peoples into massive city building. That, like the great change, their timelines seem to be like just strangely off as well. And then the collapse periods definitely are the 3,500 year period, the 7,000 year period, and then there's smaller collapses within that of something on the 400 year, and then the 2,000 year change of ages. So somewhere in there's a looping of overlapping collapse periods. Some are greater than others, but for sure that era, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this fortification building was 3,500 years old.
So you think that the fortification, now, what would be the reason for the fortification of this part of land? I mean, obviously, scavengers and invaders and people that would want to, take from you, barbaric like people, but would this serve any other purpose other than to keep people out?
Well, we don't know if the capability for electrical generation, not on hydro, but using, any type of, like the pyramids sit on top of aquifers, and then, Wyden Cliff Tower with Tesla using also was on top of an aquifer. So there seems to be something with directed water through canals that's also an integral part of ethereal electricity and wireless transmission of power. Now, we don't know if there are metals encapsulated in this, or what the substrate was within that could generate. Now, maybe we're looking at a giant power station for that part of the peninsula. We just don't know. The tech is so old, and the building and the earthworks are so old, that what's been stripped off of there for new building materials. Okay, so these people come in, they find an uninhabited city that's mainly wrecked from a reset, floods, it could be waves, whatever. They need to rebuild. So the first thing they're going to do is they're not going to go out and manufacture bricks. They're going to strip stuff off of the hills and the fortifications that are really close to them. And this is a recurring theme too, is a lot of stuff was stripped off of the existing earthworks to use to build the city inside. So think about the water usage. Yeah, it's a great way. Okay, but what's the real purpose? Are you going to tell me you're just going to do that much work to cut off, a 2-mile journey of a boat going through there? They could just go around that little peninsula on that small little island, like, in an extra hour or two. So why would you do that much work? They're carving water canals to save on transit time. Well, dude, you're talking about an extra hour going around the tip of that thing. Well, come on, I don't believe that.
We had boats back then? We were seafaring people, right? Or have we not discovered boats by this point?
Oh, absolutely. They're finding all kind of inland boats. That was another recurring theme too, was because I asked the curator everywhere I went, I don't care what place I went to, I was like, are there any stories and themes of waves or wave damage or kind of really high tides for, small periods that would have disrupted, sea commerce, or have destroyed, or at least, inundated the coastal areas of some cities? And the answer was yes, 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 and yes, again and again and again. And there are more than a handful of ports that were completely abandoned across northern Italy. Now, the story goes, well, the river stopped running through, so they abandoned the port. But now these ports are like, half a mile inland. And I'm like, I get it. If it was a water port up the Amazon, I get it if the river changes course. But this is a seaport. It really shouldn't matter that much if the river coming from a mountain somewhere changes course. You're on the sea. It really shouldn't matter too much. But to have the excuses of, well, the river changed course and then everything infilled, and that's why all these ports are at the uniform level of probably, half a mile inland all along a line there. Like, what happened to that? What pushed all that earth in there? What caused that? Like, subsistence perhaps, or, land raising perhaps. I mean, what causes that? And the old port of Rome too, if you go down on the west side and you go from Rome directly west out to the coast, you'll find some old lithographs of these giant, just like magnificently giant pre-Greek ports out there. One is a perfect octagon, but that thing's like 1.5 miles inland now. But then it was from an octagon into a half moon, into a larger half moon with 100-foot tall statues standing there at the port entrance, and all that's gone. And the only thing left of it now is the octagon. I did a full video on that one. And you can still see vestiges using Google Earth of the furthest, largest outer port rings that are underwater now, completely 100% underwater. And then that middle port ring area has disappeared because they put an airport there. But the last little bit of the octagon is still visible. It's a lake in itself, and it's an archaeological. You have to buy a ticket to go in and see it. But that whole area too, that follows right along with the inundation of. So you're telling me that, and here's the thing too, when you're looking at today's measurements, the octagon shape of that lake is still visible, and you can see the causeway that connects to the center part. but then the outer rings are still underwater out in the ocean. We're talking something that was built thousands of years ago that was at least a mile deep as a port when you come in through. Like what we do today with our ports could rival that, but you're talking 3,000, 3,500 years ago. When you start to make the entry coming past the breakwall and the causeways there, that still sends you another more than a mile inland before you finally reach the disembarkation point. I mean, that is a lot of stone and buildings and earthwork to put together, supposedly as a inferior and prehistoric peoples, almost is the way that they try to teach us in history, that anything prior to 500 years ago they were living in mud huts and kind of thing. But you go back and they'll give it to the Greek and Romans. Yeah, they had some temples. Yeah, they had this, the Temple of Jupiter, whatever. But they never talk about the port construction because it's so vast, it rivals anything we've done today. And again, the building construction of the old amphitheaters, or the Colosseums, excuse me, it rivals. If the smallest ones that were reconstructed that they couldn't build to the previous like girth and giantness of the builders of the previous reset, still sat 30,000 people. That's what our Colosseums and things seat today. Apparently the large one that was built prior could seat up to 100,000 people. So that rivals any of our stadiums that we have today for playoff games. You're looking at orders of magnitude larger, but that's not supposed to exist in the historical past. That's the recurring theme, is everything that shouldn't exist in the past exists in the past. And we never talk about it. And what's the timeline for the reset, and why did it reset? That's the whole thing. Why did it reset every single time? Why are we finding we've gone from largeness to smaller to less, to more inferior, less, I guess, missing a word there. It's early in the morning anyway.
No, I think I appreciate you for being here. It definitely is super early. It's light where you are and it's dark where I am. But I wanted to share this image because I found this image very interesting that you sent me. What's going on in this picture?
Well, this is the coat of arms for the city of Palmanova. That star fort that you showed me, this is the coat of arms for their city.
Yeah, the double-headed eagle at the top left is
Austrian. Yeah, originally from Austria. Now that's another thing. Anywhere that this fingerprint of the builders has gone contains an eagle, double-headed eagle, at least in Europe. And then you pointed out, rightly so, that that has moved over to America with a single eagle. But where the fingerprint of the old builders and the old knowledge remains, it's a double-headed eagle. And I didn't find it everywhere. I only found it some places. So obviously, it's a sign also.
Well, it's interesting because the original double-headed eagle you can track back to Sumer. And you said that the Sumerians came to that where that star fort was located and basically gave them agriculture, right? So maybe they adopted this sigil as well, along with the other things that they showed them. Very interesting. And I talked to my friend Paul Knight that does a lot of research into Janus. His channel on YouTube is the Black Sheep Researcher. And he's talking about Janus being this double-headed entity. And Janus is like the god of like everything. He's the god of archways. He's the god of doorways. He's the god of keys. And he's always symbolized with 2 heads or 3 heads. And that's immediately when I looked at this image, I was like, that's Janus right there at the top. And then how that's been carried over into the United States with the one-headed eagle. It's just really fascinating and really interesting, the symbolism here. And this one has a crown over its head. Hey, I don't know. It's very interesting. And you got this chimera thing down here. What is that, like the body of a lion? And then I was talking to you about the book of Ezekiel earlier when we were discussing Ezekiel seeing the being coming down from the sky. I think it had 5 heads, I believe, one of an ox, one of an eagle, one of a lion, and a few other animals. But you got a lion body here and a double-headed eagle. I don't know what it means, but it's interesting.
And I would say one thing. I have and this came to me in a church, a cathedral of all things. So I was looking for the answers. I just can't figure this thing out. Why is this? The cross that you're looking at is the galactic cross. They encoded that in the religion so we would not forget it when we came to this new turning coming from Pisces to Aquarius. Like the best way to encode messages is into religion itself. So I know a lot of people are going to have a difficult time, with a lot of the research I'm going to be putting out. But what we're looking at, the reason the cross is there is this reference time of the returning of Christ and the returning of the Christ consciousness. They're talking about the Birkeland current and the physical change of energetic flow through our solar system that's going to bring in heightened awareness to the human being. And, you consider Christ consciousness at a higher level, a higher vibrating, more understanding in the interwovenness of all complex life and energies that exist within dimensionality, as well as how we are connected through spirit back to creator. Like we've lost that. We went through the dark ages. That is coming back again. So in the literal sense, if you're looking about an energy transmutation as we're moving through space, astrology explains through those different zodiac signs that move every 2,000 years. We just moved into another one, just moved into Aquarius. And it's interesting that the biblical references are all talking about the return of Christ right as we exit Pisces, which was the beginning at the birth of Christ, into Aquarius right now. And that cross you're seeing there is not a crucifixion cross. That is the galactic cross, that we are moving into another galactic cross, and a time of disruption ensues once again. I have a couple, oil paintings from the 1400s where Christ he's not on the cross. His head is laying exactly in the center of that, and it looks like the old Rosicrucian cross, square right in the middle of the cross. So there's a lot of things that were encoded in biblical paintings, because you have to realize how powerful the church was at that time. They were going to burn Copernicus alive for saying that the sun was the center of our solar system. So to encode this knowledge, which was being passed down through quote unquote secret societies, had to be done in a biblical contextual way. So when I'm looking at saints, they're not saints, they are the planets. And they put the different configurations. It's no different than us looking at like a solar system scope model where the planets would reside in the heavens on their orbits in different times of the year. Well, all you have to do is just take the planets and turn them into saints and put them in that same rotation, and you can find different alignments too. And when you see the halos glowing on the heads of a lot of these saints, or Mary and baby Jesus and thing, Mary is always depicted in this yellow clothing with the glowing, aura around the head. That's the sun. And the baby Jesus, that's the sun protecting us, the earth, with the electromagnetic field. Now, it's interesting because sometimes you see Mary super glowing and the earth is not glowing, and it's kind of tipped on the side like this in a distress state. But then other times, baby Jesus has a glowing halo and Mary has a glowing halo, and they're holding each other and they're in symbiosis with the two magnetic fields matching. And then you can look on the outside and you can see where Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are represented by the staff, which would be the planets themselves. And then also you can see the Saturnian rings, very clean. Once you start to see it, you're like, oh, that's not a halo, man. Those are rings. They knew what Saturn looked like way back then. Then you start to take a whole different look at the encoding of paintings on how they were representing not only orbital flows, but the energetic electromagnetic effects between those planetary bodies, and also disruptions in that cause distress on Earth right here. And, a lot of people are going to have a very difficult time and very big problem that are super dogmatic about the decoding of these paintings, because that, in my opinion, is the only way you could have hidden this information, is in plain sight. That's the only way it could be done. And it had to be done under the guise and the rules of the church. So everything had to be in a biblical text. So how would you disguise it? But it's all there for, once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. It's very difficult to unsee once you see it.
Well, this double-headed eagle right here has the crown on the top of, well, is that Do they have crowns on top of their heads and then one big crown over top of them? I mean, that could be depicted as the corona of the sun as well. And the crown of thorns on Jesus can be depicted as the corona around the sun. Halo can be depicted as the corona around the sun. You know, it's sun god worship.
Yeah, what about the filaments coming off the sun? If you had, in a highly electrified state and you had 20, 30 filaments coming off the sun that were visible from our planet, then that would be the crown of thorns, would it not?